I remember like one of the first kids that I ever saw that came in that really just was not developing in their motor skills. They weren't walking on time, and they were really late. He was like 2 years old. And when I first really kind of started to understand that the energy production systems, or our mitochondrial system, was we did an organic acids test on him. We started supplementing specifically for his mitochondrial deficiencies that he had going on. And within 2 weeks, he was walking, which was crazy. Okay, we're going to talk about how we get kids to walk. Little kids that aren't walking, different therapies we do, what we normally find, just a really easy conversation about that. And I don't know if I should talk to the camera on this one or not, but really easy conversation around that and different things we find in kids that are maybe they're 2 to 4 years old and they're not walking, and maybe they don't have a major diagnosis, maybe they do, maybe they have a genetic disorder, maybe they don't, maybe they've had injuries, but I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen that we get some really cool changes really quickly with kids that aren't walking, and maybe they've been doing all these therapies for a year or two and not getting to that point, and then they come here for a week or two straight, or maybe they do a couple intensives and get to the point where they start walking 20 steps really quickly. And we're just going to talk about how we do that and how we make that happen. So, and then we have Dr. Loren here. He's going to talk a lot about just different stuff that he finds. I'm going to talk about stuff that I find in my initial exam, different stuff that he's learned with working with these kids as well, and just run through it all. So I would say from my perspective, when I do the initial exam, typically biggest things that I'm finding are energy production issues, like they just don't have efficiency in their motor systems. Number one. Number two, they have tons of primitive reflexes, lots of reflexive movements, and then obviously their balance centers aren't integrated. But points off of that.
I would say all of those are contributing to their delays. Like there's really no one cause for a lot of these kids. There's just multiple levels of inefficiencies or weaknesses that they have, or it's like being able to like have the office set up to target so many different components of energy production and oxygen and different modalities and manual techniques and different stimulations, just to like tap in and help provide feedback, help to balance muscle tone, help give more stability. But I think like this is obviously a special place here because we are set up to help these kids specifically with all of these limitations that they come in with, whether it's food sensitivities, energy production, their range of motion, like just being like manual based therapists, movement based therapists. Like I would say like this is essentially like our niche. Like it's one of the populations that we can have the biggest impact on, especially that 2 to 4 age group, just with like they're not growing out of these things, they're growing into them. They're getting older, they're losing their window of plasticity. Like that age group, there's so much that we can do, and they're so capable still. There's so much potential that we can just attack things or implement different therapies and modalities to help all these different angles. So like when you say 2 to 4, like that's to me that's just super exciting. Just like that, like getting a kid at that age, just knowing they have 4 to 6 years of plasticity and like really good developmental windows left. I think that's huge to be able to connect with them and get our hands on them and like get lasers on them and just help them out.
Yeah,
sure.
And I remember like one of the first kids that I ever saw that came in that really just was not developing in their motor skills. They weren't walking on time, and they were really late. He was like 2 years old. And when I first really kind of started to understand that the energy production systems, or our mitochondrial system, was we did an organic acids test on him. We started supplementing specifically for his mitochondrial deficiencies that he had going on. And within 2 weeks, he was walking, which was crazy. He didn't have nearly the same delays like from a motor-based aspect that a lot of the ones we see now, but that really kind of triggered that. And then I also had another kid that had he was older, he was like 12, had a severe concussion. At 2 weeks after it, completely lost the ability to walk, and then same thing, supplemented for his mitochondrial system, and within 2 weeks he was walking, which was crazy. But that really, I think, for me personally, brought a lot of light to how big of a deal that just energy, inefficiency, not having enough energy, and a big reason why these can't develop. So kind of going off of that, like talking about why energy systems don't develop, I think would be something really valuable for parents to understand of why doesn't a kid have enough energy? And you kind of touched a little bit on it, but like if a kid has different food sensitivities, it's going to create neural inflammation. Neurons, when they're inflamed, they can't function appropriately. They can't produce energy. Things like underlying infections, traumatic brain injuries like concussions, any brain injury just in general, we're going to get dysregulation of those cells and we're not going to produce energy efficiently. Anemias,
toxic exposure.
Yeah, glucose elevated, too high blood sugar, too low blood sugar. So for blood sugar spikes, we get neural inflammation. If it gets too low, we get neural inflammation. So that's the importance of just running before kids come here, is running basic labs or having that information, because if they're anemic and they don't have oxygen in their system, like just oxygen to their system, it just can't develop. Or if they have super high or low blood sugar, that's going to affect them. So knowing that information, and I think the importance of running just some specialty labs before they come to figure out some of those underlying mechanisms is really important. And then when they get here, I mean, you can talk about all the different therapeutic aspects, like different therapies that we can use to get more energy to the system. So
yeah, and maybe like a quick step back, but most of the kids that we see for like learning issues, attentional issues, a lot of them have like motor milestone delays. Like you asked about crawling, they might not have crawled at all, or they crawled for a week or two and then started walking early. So I think like that's like the first step, is just being like aware of development early on, and just being able to like be proactive as much as possible. So like still to that point, that young age, and just being able to identify that. But like then once they're in here, just like using all the, like everything we have in the office, supplementing oxygen, hyperbaric, like just driving energy to those neurons that might be undersupplied or not as efficient. Utilizing laser, just like helping calm inflammation, provide energy, giving feedback, balancing muscle tone, range of motion adjustments, like chiropractic adjustments with kids, and just like being able to work with a kid's movement for 2 hours at a time, as opposed to, you know, them just popping in for a short PT session, or just going to like a local chiro, which is obviously beneficial for all kids. But I think like the model here, just having 2 hours where you can be hands-on with a kid, have multiple therapists, multiple different sources of support to their neurology, just like stimulating and boosting that system simultaneously just helps kids have breakthroughs in their movement and mobility and cognitive function and eye stability. So,
and how impaired like is, like I think back to a lot of these kids, like how abnormal their even just simply things like their range of motion, like they can't turn their head in full directions, which we need to be able to, you know, turn our head to maintain our balance centers. We need to, like they have, a lot of them have big scoliosis and big curvatures of their spine. They have tightness in their lower extremity and their hips. They can't even create extension of their low back. Like I even think just from an aspect of overall development, like just getting those basic things in place so they can have full range of motion, like that's probably one of the biggest things that plays into them starting to create stability in other areas. So
I think too, like to that point, like parents are able to learn from like what we're doing here, like hands-on. They get home plans. They can work on their child's movement. They can do a lot of these therapies at home, but they're targeted. Like they come here, they find out what to work on. That way, once they're like, the kids make these huge leaps, they make like these like massive changes in a week, but then parents are also informed on like how to do some of these movement-based techniques like once they get home. And like to me, like that's incredibly powerful, like empowering a parent to be hands-on with their child, to understand what normal movement is like, and help to continue to develop that once they're out of here, just with exercise and different activities. And like we try to pair that obviously for every level of independence, like every age group. But I think that's something important about our office, is just empowering parents to be hands-on with their kid. Like it goes a long way, because there's nothing magic about our hands. Like we have a lot of experience, like we like just going through school and just like being a provider for years, like that helps, it gives us a lot of knowledge. But like once people can understand what we're doing and like how to, like what we're looking for, I think they can take a lot of that and implement a lot too.
100%.
So.
And like just from that, like kind of walking through like the things we work on, you know, energy is number one, probably. I would say range of motion, just normal movement, is number two. And then we get into primitive reflexes, which is, I think personally, I believe it's one of the most important aspects of neurodevelopment, because it's something that I shouldn't say every kid, but almost every kid that comes in here that's struggling, they miss these proper development of these reflexes. And when these reflexes are in the way, they completely alter normal activity of our motor centers and our movement centers. And especially like an asymmetrical tonic neck reflex, a symmetrical tonic neck reflex, a Moro reflex or a startle reflex, a tonic labyrinthine reflex. Like if a kid still has those, these motor systems just can't efficiently develop. And then lastly, on top of that would be, once that we get rid of all those reflexes, it's kind of wild. Like kids will start getting so much more stable, and they'll go up against gravity and not have nearly as many challenges just by inhibiting those reflexes. Then you actually get the chance to start working on their balance centers. And you can talk about some of the different activities that we do in the office that maybe a parent can do at home to just start building, whether that's around reflexes or even just around vestibular system, like just some basic activities that a parent can do to start getting some stability.
Those reflexes, like you mentioned, are in the way, but they're also indications that that child is still developing. Like they're there to develop those motor systems, and if they're still there, there's an inefficiency. And like that goes back to your initial point. Like is it energy production? Is it movement? It's usually both. And then that's why those primitive reflexes are still hindering that child, is because that brain is still needing that developmental
they're
input.
there to stimulate the brain.
Yep. And so if they're still present, they're in the way, but they're also indications that there's something delaying normal development here. So we'll probably show some videos here, but like with like this boy, like we had him on vibe plates, just providing more feedback, just more sensory awareness. Like the more our cortex can understand its environment and be able to perceive our body awareness, just the more activity you can create. And like if you look at the brain, your somatosensory cortex lines up directly with your somatomotor cortex. Like they literally touch each other, and they like create an activity in one. Just creating sensory feedback can help to drive motor function. And from a blood vessel standpoint and blood shunting standpoint, they're going to be supplied by the same blood vessels, are very, very close too. So if we activate one system, we're actually pushing blood flow to the other system, which is super cool. And just like the whole brain, nearly to some degree, is devoted to movement or perception, whether it's eyes, balance, posture. Like the whole brain shares these same movement areas are still our cognitive centers, and they our memory and just like regulatory. And so just like improving your child's motor systems, like their sensory and movement and control, just is building for their cognitive skills down the road. Just so I think that's huge. But so vibe plates, BOSU balls, just stimulating vestibular input in these kids. We do a lot of spinning just to help fire into these systems. So like for example, like a cerebellum is receiving all kinds of input from our vestibular system. So like change of direction and translation side to side, and head tilt forward and back, and reaching up and looking down and being able to stabilize. All of that is creating activity at our midline cerebellum, where we also have control of our eyes and control of our core, and we need to develop those more mid structures before we can get more lateral and have control of our shoulders and hips and hands. So just like you'll see like some simple things where we're spinning kids in chairs. Like one, we're observing, like, hey, what are this kid's eyes doing? How do they react? Like we're using it clinically to observe like what's going on, but also just to create blood flow in a cerebellum by rotations, or like challenging kids' balance is also going to help be developmental for all these other centers down the road. And so like that co-activation, just using different modalities. So like in a session, we might do 20 different things. Like we might do 20 different exercises, and we'll go from 5 minutes here, 10 minutes of this, but and then right before you really challenge a kid, like with this boy, like before we'd walk, like Dr. Josh I would stimulate the bottom of his feet, just provide feedback, just essentially wake his brain up with activity, with blood flow. We would do some spinning. We would tip him over and activate his vestibular system, just to give him some awareness and drive activity, and just improve just the energy production just through more blood flow, just through passive stimulation, movement, passive and active stimulation. So
and I would go off of that and saying, if you have a kid that's really close to walking but isn't walking, doing just a massive amount of stimulus, then having them try to walk, they're going to be way more stable, and they're probably going to get 3 or 4 or 5 more steps out of it, and then you can do it again. Like, I think that's one of the biggest things, is just stimulating a Babinski reflex, and then doing range of motion, and then doing sensory stuff, and then spinning them like after, and then doing head drops and all those things. Like right after that, getting them to try to walk, they'll walk so much farther, which gets more efficiency in the systems that help them to walk, and because they're having to push energy there. And then as you keep doing that over and over and over again, like we might do that, I don't even know how many times in a session. Like we may do that 10 times in a session, 15 times in a session, just stimulate and then have them try to walk, stimulate, have them try to walk. And we may start with like having them hold on to a stretchy band or something like that gives them a little bit of resistance or a little bit of support, but we're not holding them up. Gives them, and then we just make that stretchy band a little bit looser and a little bit looser, so they have to create more and more stability as we work into that. But I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons why kids walk so much quicker, is because like we're just giving so much information to that brain.
Point there, like all that stimulus before we challenge them, before we like try to get them to take that next developmental step or like encourage that next step, like we're supporting their neurology too. Like we're supplementing with basically pure oxygen. We're creating a lot of energy production with lasering over their motor centers, and just helping nudge these kids or like lift them up with these modalities, I think really helps them have that energy production. They have the neurological activity to have the motor control. I think that a lot of times with like all these stimulations, sometimes like if a kid has sensitive food sensitivities, if they have these inflammatory markers, if they have poor mitochondrial function, sometimes they can't tolerate it. And so I think like just here being able to support that through oxygen supplementation, through laser, and just being able to like monitor a kid and know like when we've reached their threshold, just monitoring their pulse ox, observing their behavior, checking primitive reflexes. Like, are these things improving reflexes, or are they making them worse? Like if they're making them worse, fatiguing. So I think like what makes like a really successful office, like as far as successful outcomes for the kid, is can they support, can they monitor, and can they like kind of flirt with that level of fatigue where you're pushing that kid to develop, but also you're supporting them in that process. Not getting them so fatigued to where they start heading the other direction, really. And you can monitor that through pulse oxes. You can monitor that by checking their reflexes, by just overall, like, do their eyelids start to drop, like they're getting super fatigued. And then during those cases, we do other stuff with them. We do passive activities, we do range of motion, we do just stuff to, really help them chill out and just calm their body after, a quote unquote stressful event, or, kind of like a workout type of thing. I would say biggest takeaways for parents, if your kid isn't walking, isn't getting to that point, looking for someone that is going to look at all those aspects. They're going to look at the energy production. They're going to look at the movement. They're going to look at reflexes, vestibular function. I think that's super helpful. But even at home, a lot of these things can be addressed at home. They can be worked on at home. Just finding the right providers to help with that, or doing research on your own and learning that. But what would you say is kind of big takeaways for parents that they can do? What's good for people is like what's good for kids' brains. So lots of activity, lots of fresh air, clean water, just like make sure they're breathing through their nose, make sure they're getting good sleep, making sure they're getting their B vitamins, their omega-3s, just a healthy diet, tons of antioxidants in their diet, just supporting every aspect of their well-being is going to help their neurodevelopment, every single time. So like so much of that can be done like even before an intensive, and like we see, I think that's the benefit now, is like since we're scheduled so far out, a lot of these people can make these lifestyle changes or these dietary changes before they even come in, and I think that's even improved the outcomes over the last I think that's even improved the outcomes with these kids, is just being able to identify these issues as early as possible, address them, and then rehab them. Yeah, for sure. Well, I hope this helps you guys all out. Hopefully this helps some kids walk. Hopefully it helps some providers know what to do with some of these kids when they come in and get changes really quickly. And have an awesome day. God bless.